on this episode, man, I got a fun one for you. If you love Steve McQueen, you're going to absolutely love this interview. It's with our good friend Marshall Terrill. We've interviewed Marshall on here several times before. Great prolific author. Whether he's writing on his own or collaborating with others, he's doing a phenomenal job. And Marshall is known as one of the most knowledgeable people on Steve McQueen walking the planet today. He's written several books about Steve McQueen. And this one here is about the last two movies that Steve McQueen made, which was, of course, Tom Horn and his last film, The Hunter. And the name of the book is Steve McQueen, The Last Reel, The Making of Tom Horn and The Hunter. And this is where Marshall, and with his good relationship with Barbie McQueen, Steve McQueen's widow, they dig into all the notes and photos and other records involving those two films. And as you might expect from Marshall, it's a page turner, in depth. Even if you're a hardcore McQueen fan and you think you've heard it all, I guarantee you haven't. This book is a must-have if you're a Steve McQueen and or a big-time movie buff. This book is for your library. Just trust me on that. You're going to want the book. And as always, while you're listening to this interview and watching it, would you mind hitting like and subscribe? It shouldn't be costing you anything, but it sure helps Boomerocity out a lot. And we'd be eternally grateful for that. And also, please share this interview with your friends who are heavy into movies and especially into Steve McQueen. They're really going to like this. So without any further ado, here's my latest interview with my good friend Marshall Terrill. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson with Boomerocity. Take care. Marshall.
Hey, how are you?
Man?
Good. I talked to Nancy Lee today.
Did you? I think she's upset with me.
No, she didn't indicate that at all to me at all.
Oh, well, I'm half kidding. I was in Nashville over the weekend, and when I posted about it, she wrote on there. She goes, you didn't call me." So
That's funny.
I need to make another trip there. That's the first time I'd been to Nashville since before my dad was sick. So I, now that he's gone, I had some plans and went over there and had a good, quick visit there. So
Yeah.
I got to make up for some lost time there. But
I remember that drive. It was like a 3-hour drive, if I'm not mistaken, right?
From my door to, actually about more like 4, depending on the traffic. Now, if you're going to downtown Nashville, it's like 6.
Oh boy.
So, I mean, I'm kidding on that, slight exaggeration. When I used to work downtown, by the time I left my office, got to my car and got out of downtown, it was usually about 30 minutes and then another 4 hours home, because I live on the opposite end of Sevierville. And so there's a lot of lights and stuff like that there. But a lot of changes there, man. When's the last time you've been to Nashville?
Actually, it was to see Ken for his birthday. I want to say it had to be 10 years ago, somewhere in there.
Yeah, they had the big bash for him. Wasn't Phil Kagi there too?
Yes, that was the day I was there. Were you there that day?
No, I didn't get an invite. I wasn't that close to Ken. Ken, I interviewed him a bunch of times. He signed all of his books for me. But he and I never met in person. It was always by phone. Yeah. And great guy, though, man. I think I told you this last time. When I knew he was sick, I put on my calendar about every couple weeks to remind me to shoot him a note, just to let him know I was thinking of him and praying for him and all that. And when he passed, I decided to leave it on there because I didn't want to forget, what all was going on there. But super, super nice guy. Well, hey, before we get into this new book of yours, tell me how the Jay Sebring book's been doing for you and Anthony.
Well, it's been doing really, really good. And I noticed, like, with your account, it's going up there, It's in the 500s now, where like 500 people have viewed it, which is nice. But, it got some coverage in People magazine. And
I saw that. Man, that's
yeah,
great.
yeah. So the publisher's very happy with it. We're doing a podcast tomorrow. It's called Danny After Dark, and the funny thing is you have these Mansonites, like hardcore Mansonites, and it's kind of like Colonel Parker. They don't want to believe the quote narrative, even though there's documentation to prove everything that we're saying. You know, they want
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
be able to say, well, this might have happened, or this might have happened, or here's what I really think what happened. Like they wanted to believe that Jay was broke because Roman Polanski said so in a police interview or a polygraph test. But Anthony has a documentation that shows he was worth $339,000 in 1969, which is like $3 million,
Yeah.
and far from broke. So stuff like
Yeah.
that, like it's like Colonel Parker. It's like there's a narrative that people have always bought and accepted, and if there's new information that comes to light, they don't want to believe it.
Yeah. Well,
But
I
thank
saw
you for
the
your post, and I saw that interview with him too, and I
yeah.
thought that book came out in August. Why are they doing it now? And then secondly, um, I mean, he's saying something new, but it's not anything that I haven't, that we haven't said. It's
Yeah.
new for him. But the funny thing was he tried to make it like they were two dysfunctional people, and it's like, no, they're not. Like they didn't communicate with each other. It's like, what are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And
I
Colonel
to
Parker
me
communicated with Vernon about the problem, about the issue, and he didn't say that.
mhm. Right, right. Well, and the whole thing about the gambling thing, I think you and Greg kind of put that to bed in your book,
Well,
which
and the
Peter
other
didn't.
interesting thing is that George Hamilton, I felt like, was embellishing all of his stories about the Colonel, just to make it seem like, yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that they had that kind of a relationship. It seems like I vaguely
Yeah, they did.
remember reading that they were friends and such, but um, I mean, I don't know. And then,
For
of
him to
course,
say that Colonel Parker spent $1 million at a table in one night in 1969 or whatever, that's what $10 million. Colonel was so frugal he would not have done that. You saw how he lived.
yeah, very, very Spartan
Yeah,
lifestyle, you know?
yeah. I mean, he didn't have a mortgage because William Morris paid for it.
Right.
So
Well, the thing I noticed too, and I don't know, maybe the stuff got moved around, maybe Greg willed it to the estate or whatever, but making it sound like all the Colonel's stuff was in Elvis and Vernon's office, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but that wasn't the case. I mean, that stuff was
yeah.
squirreled away
Well, and
somewhere else.
that's the subject of a lawsuit with Greg's son right now because Greg has that stuff. Um, what I think, well, again, I think Colonel kept two sets of everything. So he had stuff for his Tennessee office, and I think he had stuff for his Palm Springs office. And he sold Graceland what was in his Tennessee office, but he still had his stuff from Palm
Mm.
Springs.
Was Palm Springs more involved than the Tennessee office as far as amount of material and different material?
It seems to me like it was the same because when Greg showed me his stuff, I mean, he had more like thousands of return checks, binders and binders of, memos and all kinds of stuff, you know.
Yeah, it's
So
it's interesting that whole thing. You know what? I think long after we're gone, people are still going to be squabbling
yeah.
about it
Well,
all.
the
You know?
funny thing is that people like Goralnik is like the beloved Elvis author, and people are now like disgruntled with him for coming out and saying that this was not the relationship, that was truly, they were upset with him that they had a cordial relationship, you know. You should
Well,
read some of the
right now
comments on Amazon.
I've been watching the stuff going on the other fan groups too. And man, there's a big urinary Olympics, to put it bluntly, about between about, the people that are on Priscilla's side, which I got the book and I quit reading it. Honestly, it just wasn't hitting me. It seemed like it was probably some more regurgitated stuff that she had already written. That's how it was striking me, and I lost interest real quick. But I do have it for my library. But there's people siding with her and Lisa Marie and the kids and grandkids and all that, and then Ginger Alden's in the mix again, and
Yeah.
there's and then of course Linda Thompson, and the women of Elvis are just the fans of those people, and I think it could be. I think if you take away the group of people that signed up for one of those Facebook pages of one of those women, and or met them one time, and in that fan group on Facebook or any of the other social media, they asked a question and they got an answer. I see it all the time. I'm sure you do too, where if a celebrity answers to somebody, all of a sudden that's the biggest star in that person's life because they've had
Yep.
that little exchange, and it creates an exaggerated bond and loyalty there that's in a lot of cases undeserved,
Right. Yep. Exactly.
and not to make more out of my stuff than it is, but I've interviewed quite a few people. You've interviewed and know quite a few people. I think once you've reached a certain threshold, it's easier to put those people in the right context, the right light, and not over glorify it. And besides that, what are these people going to get out of it by defending one person or another? They're not going to get invited over for Christmas,
Yep.
anything like that. So,
Yeah.
there you have it.
Yeah.
But well, man, I love this book, man. What drove you to go into a deep dive documentary style book like this on those two films? I mean, you've done a lot of work on McQueen, and obviously you're recognized as one of the foremost experts on the guy in his career. What motivated you to do this particular book now?
Well, this to me was going to be the logical follow-up that we did, that Barbara McQueen and I did with The Last Mile, and that came out in 2006. And we had
Okay.
such a good time doing it. We got so much publicity. It spawned art exhibits. It spawned travel all around the world. We promoted that book for a good 3 years, and so I was like, okay, let's do it again. Here's my idea, and because she's taken 800 photos of McQueen, and we only used a small portion for only the best photos for The Last Mile. But I noticed an inordinate amount of photos for Tom Horn and the Hunter, and I said, "Hey, this is our follow-up." I just thought we would do it like in 2009, 2010, as a follow-up and just keep it rolling. And she's like, the last 3 years have really tired me out. I'm tired of talking about myself. And so this subject would kind of come up every year. And so finally, like in 2023, I think is when I started it. I said to her, look, 45th anniversary of Tom Horn and the Hunter coming up. I said, I want to do this book. Do I have your permission? She's like, yes, but you can do it without me, but you can use the photos. And I said, okay, that's fine. I said, 'cause the way I look at things is Steve McQueen is going to have a shelf life. John Wayne kind of had his shelf life, right? So Steve McQueen to me was like the next John Wayne. And, we all still know who John Wayne is, but uh, who under the age of 50, and the same applies with Steve McQueen, knows who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it just kind of it doesn't die off. What I'm just trying to think, but the fire hydrant is now turned off.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, I feel like that's kind of the territory that we're going to be going into with Steve McQueen one of these days.
Well,
Um,
I speaking of John Wayne, though, I just read in the last week or so, where the estate has sold what did they call it? And I didn't get to read the whole article, but it sounds like the estate has sold the rights to image,
Yeah.
name, work, the whole kit and caboodle, so that these entities that buy those kinds of things and know how to squeeze more life out of them do so now, especially I guess with the advent of AI really going to town. There may be a new shelf life or an
Right.
extended shelf life for people like John Wayne, and
Yeah.
I won't be surprised if you see it with McQueen too.
Yeah, and
What
I think
was
that probably will happen. I think that will happen, and in a way, I'm glad to hear that because when somebody like that does do that, then they are very active in promoting that likeness and image.
yeah, yeah,
And even though that there's an estate with McQueen, and they want to do things their way, on the other hand, something's got to happen. So hopefully the John with the John Wayne acquisitions, it could prove as a template for others.
yeah. Well, I mean, I want to say this right way. I say this jokingly and not, as like this is a burden to you or anything, but it seems like regardless of what you write about, there's almost always a McQueen element involved. I mean, you, know, you wrote up about him, you did some work with Greg Lowry, and then this thing with that you and Anthony just did on his uncle Jay Sebring. I mean, Steve was all through that. I
Yep.
mean, the tentacles of the guy were just all over Hollywood, and ultimately all through a lot of your work. How does that make you feel? Do you feel like sometimes you just want the McQueen thing to be kind of like over there and let people focus on the stuff you're talking about, or is that kind of cool that it gets all intertwined?
No, I like the fact that it's intertwined. What I loved about the Sebring book was again, it was a story that kind of meandered and went not all over the place, but it cut through a lot of different paths. It cut through Bruce Lee. It cut
Mm-hmm.
through the history of Los Angeles. It cut through the history of Los Angeles violence. People that have to go through the California State Department of Corrections. It just so to me, if it could, if the wide swath is just fine. And of course, we dedicated our own little chapter to Steve McQueen because he and Jay Sebring were best friends. But no,
Mm-hmm.
anytime McQueen can pop up and I can do something new and different, I'm happy to do it. Just like with this book, just the idea that I would dedicate 100 pages to each film, thinking like, when I first started, it's like I might be able to squeeze 50 pages out of it, but I was able to squeeze 100 out of it. And I even went to the publisher and said, "Hey, maybe we should do these as separate books." And he's like, "No, I just want to do it as, and as the two together." And
Mm-hmm.
it made sense because even though the two films are completely different in terms of what McQueen went through, and one's a Western and one's a modern day, they're still both bounty hunters. There's still a lot of interesting little connections I was able to find with the two films. They were both
Yeah.
made in the same year. They were both released the same year. They were made 6 months apart. Um, a lot of the people that he worked with on Tom Horn, he wanted for The Hunter, and there was a lot of that little interconnections that made it an interesting story. And of course, each film had its own unique story, origin story, and history.
Mm-hmm. We're getting into it. I mean, I've not written a book. You and I have talked about this. I probably should write one or two before I kick over, but I can only imagine what all's involved in putting this together, and just the photography that was in there. And you said that his wife had something like 800 photos. What was the process like of you guys kind of going through it, or was it a deal where she brought some to you, or you were over at her house and then you thought you had it all, and then she goes, but wait, there's more, and then plop, that kind of thing? How'd that
No,
all come about?
I've always had the photos. When we went through the last mile, we digitized everything. And so everything is there and it's documented. The only time we got together for this book was last February when I flew up to Idaho and we signed 1,500 sheets for the book. And at that time, let's see, 2024, yeah, the book wasn't even finished yet. So the process for this book was different than, say, for Sebring because even though it had a lot of text, a lot of my time was devoted to I had to create the text and then I had to pull the photos. And I wanted everything that I wrote to match you're looking at the photo. So, for example, a gentleman's talking about Steve McQueen signing an autograph for his son. I wanted to have that photo pretty much right next to where he says it in the text. So then
Yeah.
once I was finished with the text, then I had to pull all these photos and say, this fits here, this fits here. Then, of course, then you write captions, which is very, very time consuming. Um, and then of course you get it. Then you have to convey your vision to the designer, and then she has to spit it back. And then you have to make these little tweaks and adjustments. So it's a lot different than just writing a book with text and then you put photos in the middle.
Wow. That makes my head hurt.
But it's a lot more time consuming. Like I always think, oh, this book's going to be easy. I always think that, and it never is.
Yeah, yeah, scope creep. What did this story and as far as the Tom Horn portion of the book, it was clearly a passion project for him. I mean, it was a hard sell for him to get that made. It sounds like, and he used every bit of clout he had as a superstar in Hollywood to get people to begrudgingly back it and allow him to do it. What did, in your opinion, and from what you heard from his wife, what did this story and character? Because I'm interrupting myself here, but you know me fairly well. I grew up there in Phoenix, so I was a big Southwest history buff. I loved the Lost Dutchman gold mine stuff. I, of course, was very aware of Tom Horn, all that kind of thing. For McQueen, I mean, he wasn't from around there. What did this story and character of Tom Horn represent to him personally at that stage in his life? What was it about him that made Steve really passionate about wanting to make that movie?
I think, as the book reveals, he was in a different stage of his career now,
Mm-hmm.
and he was older. He was 48 or 49 when he started filming it, and Horn was around the same age, when he was hanged. So I
Mm-hmm.
think he was looking for a character study in a Western setting, somebody that he could relate with, somebody McQueen said this once. I felt like an old man by the time I was 17, and if you read Horn's story, he had all these adventures. The same with McQueen. He had a lot of adventures by the age of 17
Mm-hmm.
into early adulthood. And so the same felt for McQueen. So, and he was a Wild West figure. And again, at that same time, it just all exploded. Robert Redford wanted to do Horn. Keith Carradine wanted to do Horn. And then there was another project. Oh, yeah, with another actor. So you know how Hollywood is. These things just kind of all explode at the same time. So um, I think McQueen just what sealed it was that McQueen, and Barbie tells this story, went to the grave of Tom Horn, and he felt that Tom Horn spoke to him and said, "Do my story." Now, of course, if anybody goes to anybody's gravesite and spends the night there, they're probably going to quote unquote receive some sort of message. And it's not going to be "Don't do my story." It's going to be "Do my story." And I'm not trying to be sarcastic or cynical, but he went so far as to do that. So I think that he really felt compelled to do Horn's story, but do it in a unique way. I mean, as I read Horn's story, he didn't seem like a hero to me. But somehow or another, McQueen felt like he could, put his stamp on it, and maybe he
Hmm.
felt that Horn was wronged, and I do believe that Horn did not shoot that boy. That part I believe, but maybe he felt he was wronged, and he could really do something special with the part.
Well, Steve had a way, like all the great actors do, that he says a lot without saying anything. The look on his face, the pensiveness, that kind of thing. And I mean, my favorite movie of his was The Great Escape. Man, I remember that coming out when I was a kid, and I wanted to jump barbed wire fences with my bicycle. That's the impact he had on me. But based on your research, how aware do you think he was at the time that his time was running short? And do you think that awareness, if he had it, manifested it it manifested itself in how he approached that film?
I think it really manifested itself on the hunter because he had he there was a very famous quote from him saying, I knew something wrong was wrong with me on the hunter. However, in this book we have a story from a gentleman by the name of Frank Hill who worked with McQueen
Mm-hmm.
or for McQueen for almost a decade, and he said the only time Steve never drove was when Hill took him to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and he took him to a very special entrance for celebrities. And McQueen went in there for a couple hours, did some testing, and he came out, and McQueen said he was just fine. He just totally underplayed it, but he said, if you ever tell anybody about this, I'll kick your butt. So, yeah, only God and Steve McQueen knows if he knew at that time something was wrong. But I think if I recall right, the medical records just showed he had a spot on his lung and it was no big deal. But at the end of the film, he was asking the assistant director's wife, who was a nurse, all these medical questions. So I'm almost certain that he felt that something was wrong with him, but maybe perhaps not terminal.
Yeah. Or maybe because of the technology at the time, it didn't reveal the depth of what he was actually. They might have saw a little spot, and there might have been something behind it that was causing it to become more aggressive. What I mean, I don't know, but
Well, and there's a curious quote that he once gave, and Bud Eakins told this to me personally. He said that McQueen once said, because McQueen was always not frantic, but just everything had to be now. It had to be done today. Everything was just an exaggeration or just he wanted to do everything at 100 miles per hour. And so Eakins asked him what's behind that. And he basically said, hey, man, my dad died when he was 50. My mom died when she was 50. And I'm going to die when I'm 50. So I need to take a big slice out of life.
wow,
So I think that was his motivation throughout life. And if you
he
look at
just
him in The Hunter, he doesn't look 50. He
no,
looks 65,
yeah.
70.
Hey, be careful with that, man.
You know what I'm saying? He doesn't look like a 50-year-old man.
Yeah, yeah. You uncovered a lot of internal tensions and rewrites and studio conflicts and all of that. Kind of a two-part question there. I mean, surely a lot of the people that were involved in both of those films, probably a lot of them are gone now. So that you had that challenge to overcome.
Yeah.
What was that like? And then also, what were the biggest behind the scenes battles that Steve faced while especially making Tom Horn?
Okay, I'll answer the first part and then hopefully I'll remember the second part. The first part was, again, I've been lucky in my career that I started writing about McQueen in the late 80s, and I had perpetually kept up my relationships with all these people. And so I could always go back to the well. So in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, I was able to interview all the key people. And yes, now some of them have passed away. So I was able to draw on that. And then in terms of, and the great thing about this book was I also discovered some new people who were alive, people who were in the film that were teenagers who are now, in their 60s. But the big one to me was Tom McQueen, the writer, who's now 85. And he never talked about Tom Horn, and I had to find out why. Well, you read, in the book why. And it was disappointing to read that, but on the other hand, um, I had to document it because it was the truth.
Hmm.
Now, again, I forgot the second part of your question.
It was, what were the biggest behind the scenes battles that he
Okay.
faced while making
Yeah.
that movie?
Well, the biggest one obviously was the budget. If you recall, well, the first battle was how I wanted to go into how Tom Horn started.
Hmm.
It dates back to 1971 when he signs this contract with First Artist. And First Artist was the production company that had a distribution deal with Warner Brothers. And so he signed this three-picture contract. Um, First movie, and again, this was at the time when movie studios weren't doing so well. They were making all these big musicals like Paint Your Wagon and
Hmm.
Falling. Television became now the new medium, and so but people were still they were still going to movies, but it was they were you could only bank on the top 10 stars of the day, and McQueen obviously was one of them. And so he
Hmm.
created in 1972, he made with Sam Peckinpah The Getaway. So that was the first. And so when The Getaway became this big box office success, all these other he always had movie parts coming anyway, but he was entering that golden age for movie stars in their 40s and going and because you think, oh, movie stars in their 20s. It's like, no, if you really look at the big ones, they enter their golden era like in the 40s. And so he was
Hmm.
about to enter that golden era. And of course, he made Papillon and the Towering Inferno. And after the Towering Inferno, he was getting all of these incredible offers. Apocalypse Now, The Gauntlet, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Um, the Bodyguard that was written for Kevin Costner. That was something that was offered to him and Diana Ross. So
Wow. No, that would have been cool.
that would have been a great flick. So and the other one was The Sorcerer. If you've ever seen that with William Friedkin, and you've got to watch that movie. Oh, Roy Scheider was the star, but you watch that movie and envision Steve McQueen in it, it would have been a modern day classic. The problem with The Sorcerer, it was William Friedkin's best movie ever, but it opened on the same days as Star Wars. And
Oh, no.
so not only did it kill that, but it killed like 70s style movies. And
Yeah.
everything became about the blockbuster. But so anyway, McQueen up to that point in the mid 70s, he still hadn't given First Artist that second and third commitment. So they were really pressuring him. Phil Feldman was the producer, I'm sorry, the director for First Artist. And so McQueen, as a middle finger, he made an enemy of the people to fulfill that other one. And so that was just kind of a lesson to Feldman. And so he still had that one obligation left. And so he was going to make Old Times kind of a play with Faye Dunaway, and it wasn't going to be a Steve McQueen action vehicle. Um, so finally, they came to a compromise, and they decided on Tom Horn. And I think, and again, I think I saw, the article, which was like December of 1976. So this movie, it took 3 years to get off the ground because usually McQueen could greenlight a movie like that. So anyway, they finally that is his final obligation to First Artist, and so McQueen wanted this to be a $10 million epic, which, with the corn story, in this film, you only see the last third of his life. But he
Hmm.
originally wanted to be, Horn was there when they captured Geronimo. So they wanted it to be, he wanted to have the Geronimo story. He wanted all these. He was a Pinkerton sheriff. He wanted. It was kind of like I envision the Wyatt Earp film that Kevin Costner made, that big sweeping epic. That's what he wanted
Yeah.
to do for this story, and a $10 million budget would have gotten there. But this was First Artist, and their agreement was all their films were going to be $3 million. And even over the course of time, there was no adjustment for inflation. That's and what he really wanted to do was say, give me the budget for these last two films, and I'll give you one big great Western. And so when Phil Feldman said no, that's when he did An Enemy of the People.
Ah.
So that was still the same issue with this version of Tom Horn. So the McQueen had Tom McQueen write this big 3 hour epic, and so when Phil Parslow, the first producer, couldn't get it done for that, then they brought in this other producer who looked at the script and he just kind of just went like this and said, we can only film the last third of the film, and that's where they started when Tom Horn enters Wyoming for the last act of his life. So that was the that was really the big crushing part because McQueen never had any problem in terms of being a box office draw and money, but because he was under that special circumstance of First Artist, it was a $3 million production, which is pretty small because at that point in 1980, I looked it up, the average film was about 5 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he was not being treated at the level he deserved to be treated at, even for the budget. Wow.
But you know what's interesting about Tom Warren, which is pretty clever, um, was that most of it was shot outside, and all they really needed was that movie set in Mescal, Arizona.
Yeah.
And so, of course, he didn't get an upfront salary. He got 10% of the box office. But so
Mhm.
with that finessing, that's how they were able to get that movie off the ground.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because you know more about movies than I do. It seems to me, because like I said, I was growing up there. I was in Arizona at the time he was filming this. Burt Reynolds was filming, I think it was the Man Who Loved Cat Dancing, and there was in real life there was a lot of drama going on, like a death on the set, a lot of love triangles and things like that, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
It seems like also for behind the scenes on Tom Horn, there was a heck of a lot of drama going on, and and he seemed to be wound pretty tight. I mean, you captured that so well.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt like I was in the trailer next to him and Barbie, and I'd be reading, I'd feel myself kind of doing this, like I want to hear this, man. This is, so but there just seemed to be a lot of that kind of stuff, and I mean, and you captured the fact that Steve was intense.
Yep.
Everybody might think they would love to hang with him. I don't think I would have wanted to, because
No.
I couldn't have kept up with him, and B, I probably would have done something or said something very innocently that would have hacked him off, and he would have kicked my butt.
Yeah.
Do I have him kind of nailed that way,
Yeah,
or am I off?
everybody asks me all the time, do you think it would have been fun to hang out with him? I went, well, he was pretty suspicious of reporters. He was pretty suspicious of everybody. And if you've been around a person like that, and I've been around celebrities like that, it's not fun being around him because
No.
you're always on the edge of should I do this? Should I say this? It doesn't put you at ease, and you're not your
Yeah.
normal self. So it's not a lot of fun to be around somebody that's like that. And it always comes down to control. And I dislike controlling people.
Yeah.
One of my
Well, and
pet
at the
peeves.
same time, I mean, we've seen it with celebrities. There's a lot of people wanting a piece of them. They either want to be in that spotlight or near it, or derive some of the benefit from hanging with somebody like that. And
Yep.
and then when you guys like you and I approach them, want to talk to them for our reasons, you for a book, me for an interview, they've been screwed so many times by so many people that when nice guys like us show up, we got to work twice as hard to get half as much. And, I'm okay with that. And I know you are, but
Yeah.
he just seemed like uber intense. And,
Yeah. Absolutely was.
I would have wanted bit. I would have just kind of kept beyond arm's length because I didn't want to. I don't think I could have ducked as quick.
Yeah.
But many fans feel that Tom Horn contained, I guess one way of putting it is some of McQueen's most nuanced work.
Hmm.
Do you feel that people underestimate the performance of that film, and if so, how and why are they underestimating it?
Well, yeah, I agree. It was, well, James Coburn said it best. He said the Steve McQueen would have been a really fine actor if he really ever grew up. And he goes, Tom Horn was his adulthood. And I believe that. And so, yeah, I think McQueen came out. He was the golden boy, and so he came out, and he's looking older now. And he's not he's ruggedly handsome, but he's not the golden boy of the silver screen because this was his first appearance almost 5 years. And so he was brave. He had to step out and show that I'm older now, I can still do some things, but I'm older and I've got to rely more on my wits. And I think Tom Horn was a fantastic role. Now, I remember seeing Tom Horn in 1980 when it came out. I was 16 at the time, and I was a little disappointed because I was expecting that action movie, that McQueen was known for. And this was more of a drama than an action piece, but
Mm-hmm.
it was marketed as an action piece. So I think people were initially disappointed, but as a movie, as a movie ages and we all age and we look back and we go, God, that was a that was a fantastic movie. That was a great story. I didn't need all that action, this is and the very highly nuanced performances as you stated. So again, it's been reevaluated over time, and I think that yeah, this is definitely one of his finest performances.
So, I mean, Tom Horn would be considered, I guess, kind of emotionally weighty. And like I said earlier, Steve
Yeah.
could do a lot with a look and a lot less words. If he got paid by the word, he either would charge a lot for that word or not make a lot of money, right? So Tom Horn would be kind of emotionally weighty from one perspective. And then he finishes that film and jumps to The Hunter, which was a much more commercial film, right?
Right.
So what motivated that shift from what you could see, and maybe Barbie telling you about it? What was it? Was it financial? Was it artistic? Was it contractual obligations, or something else entirely?
Well, I think what his agent told him was, we need to get you back on top. And The Hunter is the kind of film it was marketed as McQueen's return, even though you had Tom Horn just 6 months prior. And so it was the kind of action movie fare that people came to expect. And it was definitely a Steve McQueen vehicle. But again, when people saw the movie, they were expecting him kind of to kick ass. And
Mm-hmm.
he comes across as he's Ralph Thorson, and he's this old guy now, and he can't run as fast as he used to, and he can't jump buildings. And he acts like an old man. And so I think McQueen, if I had to be fair, kind of took it too far. Um, but he played against type, so it was a brave choice. But again, 16-year-old guy like me, I want to see Steve McQueen kick ass, and
Mm-hmm.
to his credit, he was wanting to play his age now because it's just like when you see a 70-year-old guy on screen romancing a 30-year-old. Yeah, he's a movie star, but this is not very believable. So I
Right.
think he did not want to fall into that trap.
So the movie The Hunter had its own challenges with script issues and production
Yeah.
hurdles, health concerns, all that. What surprised you most about the making of this film as you researched it all and dug into it?
That And this isn't to say that Steve McQueen didn't fight for this. It just seemed like on every movie that he ever made, there was always a fight. There was a struggle. That was part of his being, to make something great. And so on The Hunter, there was no fight. There was no gas. There was no struggle. It was just, okay, I'm going to hit my marks. I'm going to do my thing. hey, you guys are great, you're professionals. He didn't question anything or anybody. He was just there. I don't want to say to collect a paycheck because he was in love with the story, but he was there to do his job and get it done and then be done with it. And it wasn't because he thought he was ill. It was just it was a complete opposite of Tom Horn. With Tom Horn, he's going through the divorce. His house is almost on fire. Um, he's firing script writers. He fired four directors.
Right.
Um, on the Hunter, he's just doing what he's told, and he's just there to hit his marks.
I
And there's a marked change in his personality in that, you know, he goes to the director and says, "Hey, this church has a need. I think it was $50,000. They have a need for $50,000. I'm writing a check for 50. I'm hoping that you're going to match me." And there were these stories about these kids in the Chicago slums, and they were playing with torn and frayed footballs and sports equipment, and he hands his stunt double, Lauren James, hundreds of dollars of bills and says, "Go to the sports store, buy all this new equipment. We're going to leave it out in the field, and then these kids have everything that they need." So it was more of that. It was more inward um, behavior, more thinking about the other person. Um, again, it wasn't to collect a paycheck. It just seemed like more humanity was flowing out of him and starting to show in his personality. So
well, I think that
that's what
can
I found
come
interesting.
with that. I think it could come with age too. As
Mhm.
we start becoming more and more aware of our own mortality.
Yeah,
Yeah, and plus his. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but his youth. I mean, he had a tough life growing up, did he not?
yeah, absolutely.
It's,
Yeah, he had it just as tough as those kids in the slums because he
and
grew up.
that was.
Yeah, he grew up
Go
on
ahead.
the
I'm sorry.
streets of Los Angeles, and he ran with gangs, and yeah, he he
Wow.
he slept in abandoned buildings, and when he was in New York City, he had it really rough. He carried out radiators and sold encyclopedias, and he had it tough.
Man, what I'm going to ask a two-part question here. You talk about, and again, captured it brilliantly about his resilience during filming on both films. What did the cast and crew recall most about his determination on those films? And also, in putting this book together and talking as much as you did, working as, yeah, and you know his widow, Barbie, very well. Um, on this project, was there something that came out, especially from her, that surprised you, even after all this time and all this work you've done with her? About
Uh,
him, about what happened on both movies, anything like that?
well, people were pretty amazed at his determination on Tom Horn. That he just not only his determination, but his energy. And if you recall the story from Dave Friedman, the still photographer, he was basically the director on the film. And there was
Mm-hmm.
this big wide shoot of the street in Mescal, and McQueen, before the camera started rolling, he checked everything out, and Friedman said something effective. He noticed that there was a saddle that wasn't a period piece, like down the street on a horse, and he had that great eye for detail. And he said, "Whoa, hold on, let's not shoot anything." And so, he had that saddle switched out, and
Wow.
so that was the kind of determination and dedication he had. Now, that did not happen on the Hunter. So it was again a totally night and day experience. Now, what was interesting about Barbie, I was wrong. We didn't just sign the signatures. She actually did talk to me again for this book and the details. It was just kind of we'd talk and normal talk, and then we'd switch to Tom Horn, and then she'd remember stuff that she didn't tell me for the first book. So which was great. I mean, she told me the about how Gercio got fired on Tom Horn, the very first And not only that, but she's got pictures of it. She took pictures of it
I
and
was seeing.
how
I
how
was
he
just wishing
reacted.
there were word bubbles above it. Maybe they wouldn't have been printable. I don't know.
Yeah, but she was telling me how he came in and said he's treating me terrible, and he cried. And she said, and Steve could spot weakness, and if he spotted weakness in somebody, he bore into them. So it's not like he cut him a break. If anybody showed any sign of weakness, that just fed into his insecurity. So again, he behaved differently too on Night and Day on Horn as he did on Hunter. Hunter, he was the perfect gentleman. Everything just worked out fine. You remember the story of the producer brought him to the Drake Hotel where he had this
Mhm.
beautiful suite, and he said, "Oh, he was like, this is just fine for a country boy like me. Where are you staying?" He goes, "Oh, I'm staying with the crew down at the Holiday Inn." He goes, "You mean the crew's not here?" "No." He goes, "Well, I'm going to stay with you guys in the crew." Yeah, that would have never happened on any other McQueen film, but
Yeah.
he changed.
Wow.
Yeah, so
That's
those are the
amazing.
types of stories that Barbie told me, and I was surprised how she was able to not only tell me news stories, but just with clarity. And so it really added to the nuance of the book.
I got the impression, and I can't remember specifically what it was that how you wrote it on there that gave me this impression, but was it kind of like a, even though he was working, and I'm talking more specifically about Tom Horn, that it was almost kind of like this special. I don't know if I'd call it a honeymoon, but like a special adventure or a special trip for those two. Yeah, he was working. Yeah, he had all the stresses of that, but they were living in a trailer. They had his dog with them, all that kind of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
does that capture it about right?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, she talked about how we had to set it up for your viewer. McQueen didn't actually stay in a hotel on Tom Horn. He stayed on location in a 28-foot Winnebago with Barbie and his dog. And there was no television out there. It was out in the middle. It was right there on the Arizona-Mexico border where there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing but windmills and cactus and I've been out there. And she said they were some of the greatest times of our marriage because it was just us. And so there was something about that serenity. Even his first wife, Neil, talked about being on location in Taiwan on the sand pebbles. That was the time that they were the closest ever. So I think there's a great close bond that takes place when on a movie set and it's just you and no one else. So I
Hmm.
think there's something to that.
Looking back now, how do you think that Tom Horn and the Hunter fit into the larger arc of McQueen's legacy? What do those two films reveal that all of his other films don't?
Oh, maturity is the first word that comes to mind because again, we tend to think of McQueen as the golden boy, and then 5 years later, you get these two chess pieces where he looks completely different than he does in his other part of his career, and you get mature McQueen, you get a guy who is not as intense, a guy that wants to work with other actors. Whereas before he was always wanting to steal the movie. Now he just wanted to be a part of an ensemble piece. And so yes, he was the centerpiece of the ensemble, but he no longer needed to be quote unquote the movie star. So that's
Hmm.
what you get with these two films.
Maybe, I mean, not entirely, but probably a bit more comfortable in his own skin than he had been up to those points.
I think
Wow.
so. I think, yeah, you definitely see that.
So if a young viewer asked you today, hey, Marshall, why should I watch McQueen's last two movies? What would you tell them?
Well, I'd say just like anybody, if you're curious about somebody's career, you got to watch, from start to finish. And I'm always I don't know what it is. I always like people's last films. I always like rock group's last album. For example, I think of Led Zeppelin, "In Through the Outdoor." Everybody's like, "Oh, that's a weird album." It's like, yeah, but that was them, and that was them taking a creative step that they might not have ever taken before, you know. And it wasn't just the same old, same old. It was different. And
Mhm.
gosh, are you familiar with this new movie with George Clooney? God, this is called Ray Kelly. It's on Netflix. I just watched it the other night, and it's him at the end of his career, playing an actor at the end of his career. And it's interesting because I think a lot of interesting things take place in an actor's career at the end. You know,
Mhm.
I think that is they're the culmination of everything that they've learned, and so they've got their craft down. Like Paul Newman, I wasn't necessarily a fan of his early work, but I liked him as an older guy. I don't know
Mhm.
what it was. I just think he got better.
Yeah.
And it's the same with McQueen. Now, of course, unfortunately, with the Hunter, I don't think the vehicle was as good as it could have been. But there were moments in there where you caught him like, oh man, that was a really cool piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
really cool scene.
Do you feel the films, the two films, but especially Tom Horn, do you feel that they deserve a critical reevaluation? Or
Well, I think
did
Tom Horn has undergone that,
Mhm.
and in a very positive way. It would be hard to give The Hunter a critical evaluation just because of what it is, and it was made as a pure entertainment piece, and but it's interesting to look. It's a curiosity because it's the first time that McQueen plays a modern day character,
Mhm.
um, because he always played people kind of from the past. So it was definitely McQueen in the 80s, and so that's what makes it interesting to me.
Every Marshall Terrill McQueen book seems to, and I've reading reviews because I haven't been able to track down all the books yet, and I got to save my pop bottles to be, to be able to find and get some of those older ones. But it seems like from everything I've read about them, it seems like there's always it reveals something new, and so for this book, what is the biggest revelation in this book that even longtime McQueen fans will be shocked by?
Well, I think it's the revelation by Thomas McQueen that at the start of Tom Horn that McQueen was heavily involved in drugs, specifically cocaine. And if you recall, there's a story there where, you know, and the great thing about this book is that I think I had like hours and hours of conversation with McQueen, talking to McQueen and talking to scriptwriters and talking to costume designers, trying to get it down. But McQueen had talked about how McQueen had told him what a brilliant writer he was and how much he loved it. And by the way, he paid for McQueen to have a place in Malibu where McQueen, so that they could work together on the script. And so, one day McQueen would say how wonderful it was, and then McQueen said he got a call at 3 a.m. one night from McQueen saying, "I'm getting ready to ship your macho ass back to Montana. This script is a piece of shit." Um, and then he said, and then the next day when he showed up to meet with McQueen, he didn't say anything about the phone call. But McQueen, the way that McQueen, when he said, "I had to ship your ass back to Montana," and McQueen pulled the phone away and said to his wife, "Honey, Steve's firing me again." So I think he went through the drill like 4 or 5 times.
You
And
think it
so
was the Coke talking?
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And he said his
Yeah.
teeth was chattering, and so
Mm-hmm.
what saddens me is like McQueen was probably 47 at the time, and that was near the end of his life. I know he cleaned up at the end of his life, but just the idea that he was going through that at the start of Tom
Mm-hmm.
Horn, and that McQueen revealed that, and the fact that he was only paid for half of it, but McQueen still used parts of it. McQueen was shooting from two different scripts. And that to me, that is the weakness of the movie. It's told in flashback form, and it's kind of, if you don't know anything about Horn and you're a first timer, and you're watching this movie, you're kind of going, what's going on? I remember that as a 16-year-old, like, why are they, why are they flashing back to this? What does that mean? What does that mean to me? I don't understand what's going on.
Hmm.
So I think that's part of a weakness of the film, but I think it's also perhaps, maybe it was the cocaine talking too. You just don't know.
Well, in his defense about that, if there is such a thing, as I recall, I mean, I was never a drug user, but distinctly remember reading in the late 70s and early 80s that Coke was non addictive.
Oh yeah.
It was a fun recreational drug, they said, you know. And then, later after John Belushi died, Robin Williams says, cocaine's a sign that you're making too much money,
Yeah.
but so I'm sure a lot of that was factoring into why
Sure.
Steve even, started getting into it. And of course, all the euphoria and the rush that it gives him, it probably gave him that fuel to do even bolder, crazier crap.
Right.
But
Right.
were were there any stories you initially doubted but later verified as true?
I can't say any that I doubted, but again, there were a lot of news stories that emerged. For example, Frank Hill told me about all the places that where they scouted locations. I thought that was interesting, and then how they ended up in Mescal, which, by the way, my very first book signing is going to be on January 17th on the Mescal set.
Really?
And
Oh, how
yeah,
cool.
I know. And believe it or not, I've never been there. So I've read about it. I've interviewed all the historians, but I've actually never been there. So because it had been dormant for many, many years at the time that I was writing my book. But it that'll be a fun thing to do. But he he initially wanted to go somewhere in Nevada. Had a friend there, but they would have had to build sets and things like that. And then he went to the Four Corners. Frank Hill said wasn't necessarily feeling the vibes. I think the same thing was probably it's in such a remote location. And then there's Mescal, which is it's built not too far from Tucson. So they've got this movie set where everything's self-contained and you've got the mountains surrounding you and you're 30 minutes from Tucson from major hotels and restaurants because crews don't necessarily want to be if they're working they don't necessarily want to be in the middle of nowhere and having to stay in trailers. They want modern amenities, so
Yeah.
that's why this worked out perfect for them.
Well, and if he had used old Tucson or Tombstone, he would have everybody would have recognized it. I'm sure he wanted that different look. I remember as a kid, the only set I've gone to in Arizona out of all the years I lived there, and I think it's burned down now, is that one over in Apache Junction. It
Yeah.
used to be called Apache Land. I don't know if it's
Yes.
still. Didn't it burn down?
It burned, yes.
Yeah.
And it burned a couple of times. And the one that the last one, yeah, was the only thing that remains is that chapel in the last Elvis in the Elvis Presley movie called Charo. But
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
only thing that remains from that set. But yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's unreal. You had a lot of access to previously unseen photos. Well, you said you documented them for the previous book on McQueen, but were was there anything that came out that was a piece of archival material, whether it's Barbie's photos or other documentation, other film or something that she didn't own, but you got access to for this book? It kind of made your jaw drop. You go,
Well,
holy
it,
crap!
it, it was those script meetings with McQueen because there were some excerpts that I put in there where it gave you McQueen's thought process into how he thought and again, he's perfect for film. So he could take a literary piece of material and boil it down in his mind to what he wanted the character to do.
Mm-hmm.
And he was not only just boil it down, but just cut it right to the bone. But for example, he talked about when these people conspired to put Tom Horn in jail, the town, the version of the town council, he said he wanted this meeting to take place in the outdoors so that nobody could record them or nobody could see them all enter into a building and they're just guys talking on a horse. I thought, wow, that's pretty brilliant for a movie star to come up with that bit of business.
Hmm.
And he's talking about um, how beautiful McQueen wrote, but he needed a device as an actor. And he talked about specifically John Wayne and the Shootist. If you recall a quote from that saying how Wayne, by the way, was his hero. But he talked
Hmm.
about the shootist and what a bad film it was, and how he had Wayne sitting there talking to Richard Boone, and the scene just didn't come off quite right. And then he talked about how there was a scene in Papillon where he was in isolation, and people told him that it wasn't going to work, and he's like, "But I made it work. I knew exactly what to do." So he thought in terms of how a movie star would act and it would take that writing and transfer it into what he thought would make for a great scene. And so that to me was the most, eye-popping revelation. And so it's always good because McQueen, when he gave interviews, he always downplayed acting. He never wanted to talk about acting. To him, acting he wanted to talk about race cars. He wanted to talk about anything but acting. So it was nice to get an insight into his mind, how he thought. Because like for example, if I were ever to interview Tom Cruise, I'd want to say, what makes you want to do a certain film? Nobody ever asks what makes for a great character. How does he see things? They always want to talk about the flashiness in the movie.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always want to know about the inner workings and what makes you, what draws you to play this character, what draws you to take this script and tweak it and turn it and make it your own. And how do you do that? What's involved in that process? And these tapes show exactly how McQueen does that.
The book is phenomenal. I mean, I'm both a reader and you know, and I love photography and books. If I had been one to look at men's magazines, I would have probably been one of those Playboy readers that, only get it for the articles. But your book has a lot of real meat in it, not just visual meat.
Yeah.
But there's a lot in there too. I mean, the photography. I mean, Barbie really just kind of dumped it all out on your desk, didn't she? And I think that, I mean, people might blanch a little bit, on the price of the book, but when you see what you
Mm.
get, I mean, it's a treasure trove of both facts and photos. And I think, I mean, when you wrote this, were you looking to write it to be, and you knew it was going to be quite a volume there. Who was your foremost type of reader or buyer for this book you had in mind? Was it the hardcore film historian type, or the blindly loyal Steve McQueen fan, or was it somewhere in between? Who did you think when you wrote this person is going to really love this book and have no problem buying it?
Well, I always think in terms of both audiences. I want the hardcore McQueen fan, but and I have to give them new meat. I have to give them something, but I also have to be able to welcome the newcomer who doesn't know the story and yet present it in a way that, again, is edible, but also new in a way for the old McQueen fan who has read all this stuff all before. So I have to present it in a different way. So there's a bit of a trick to that. But I definitely want to please the hardcore McQueen fan because these are the people that are going to be buying this book because
Yeah.
I really do have to give them something other than the same old story. That's why I
Right.
had to dig into new sources too that talk about, McQueen and their interactions and people who've never talked about McQueen before. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's old newspaper articles that give you great detail about things that have never been, you would say never been published before. They have been published, but through newspapers.com, you can get all that great old information. For example, McQueen get, which he never did on the first night of the Hunter, before the first day of the shoot, they had some sort of nice reception, and he actually got up there and gave a welcome speech, which he would have never done. And that was captured in an old article. And then there was another article that talked about how a stunt woman was shot on the top of her head with a blank, and it skimmed her head. And by the way, that to answer your question, that was one I had to check out. So the woman was still alive, and so her name was Janet Brady, old stunt woman from the 80s. So I was able to contact her, and she told me that, yeah, not only was it true, but McQueen drove me to the hospital and he stayed with me all night until I was treated. And she said, and when you're with Steve McQueen, doors just mysteriously open. So she goes, there was no waiting in the emergency room. The doors just suddenly opened because it was Steve McQueen. And she got treated, and once she was treated, he left.
Wow. And no lawsuits. That's amazing.
None.
Today, that would be totally
Mhm.
different. Is there anything you had to leave out that you wish you could have included in the book?
I don't think so. I think I put it all out there. I mean, there's even an interesting part of the book where Barbie McQueen confessed to me um, that she and a cowboy on the set had eyes for each other, and McQueen picked up on it. And so I wrote about that. I said, "Are you sure you're okay with this?" She said, "Yeah, that's fine." And, so and McQueen picked up on it, and the guy was mysteriously gone after a few days. So
He's so
yeah,
full.
I mean, I was able to write about everything.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So what's next for you, man? I know you helped out the Nelson boys on their book, which
Yep.
great book. I really love that. I don't know if you saw the email going back and forth between Gunner and I. I'm not going to let that slip out. I won't go down without a fight, Marshall. But the book, I just those guys crack me up how they put
Oh,
and
they are so funny. I love
they
them.
are.
They're funny, and you know what I really respect about them is that they are hard workers. They're on it. They have taken. I I don't. I respect talent, but what I respect more than talent is when you have talent, you work hard, and those guys do both.
Yeah,
But yes, they
yeah.
were funny, and I didn't write a thing for that book. All I did was just give it a light edit. But I read their stuff, and I said, "You guys don't need a ghostwriter. You guys are fine writers. I mean, you guys are fantastic." So
Oh yeah.
that book is all them.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
They're I mean I literally I would be laying in bed reading it and just laughing out loud at how they would, put a nice little play on words on something and some of it was language I don't necessarily use, maybe in my head, but never verbalize it. But those guys are a hoot. Like I said, I'm almost finished with it, but man, and I think that book's going to open a lot of eyes as to
Oh yeah.
what their lives were like,
Yeah.
and
They even turned their pen on me. And when you get to it at the end, they said, and because I was reading this stuff and it was so outrageous. I'm like, guys, you got to tone it down. I said, I want people to like you. And by the end of the book, they said that they write about that, and they said, but we're gonna give them a hall pass. Um, they were just an absolute delight to work with. But to answer your question, I've got four books in the pipeline.
wow,
I've I'm working on I'm doing a book on the history of reel to reel music, which is a recording studio in Georgia. The founder was the father of the bassist for the group Collective Soul, Will Turpin.
wow, yeah, okay,
So
yeah, I
this
talked to Will,
yeah,
yeah,
so this book will chronicle that history. It's the longest running studio in Georgia. And then I just and this is something you'll definitely relate to. 2 weeks before my father passed, we took a trip to Globe, Miami, Arizona, and he was 83 at the time. And I said, Dad, I want to record some of your stories. And
Mm.
he goes, I said, you know, we got a 4 hour trip. I said, I want to record your stories. I said, I don't know why. I said, I just feel like I have to. Because internally I was thinking, you know, he's in 83. These stories will die with him if he doesn't get them on the record. So, so 2 weeks later, you know, he was one of the first people that died in the pandemic in July
Mm.
of 2020. So, I had these 4 hours worth of tapes, and I just didn't do anything with them for 5 years because it was just too hard, you know. Uh, it was too hard to listen. Like my mom would send me old photos, videos. Like I just couldn't find it was really hard just to see all that stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just the way that I dealt with it. But and we had a very close relationship. So anyway, after 5 years, I decided to listen to these tapes, and I went, man, you know what? There's some really cool stories in here. So from that 4 hour conversation, I got 21 little vignettes. So I just got a publisher to agree to his book because it was mainly about his childhood growing up in this copper community. And so the book's called Dust, Copper, and Curveballs: My Life in Globe, Miami, Arizona. And so it's going to be a small book, but he kept all these photos from his childhood. And so a photo of the vignette will appear on the left, and then the vignette will be on the right-hand side,
Oh,
him
cool.
telling the stories. If you want, I can read you just a quick little.
Please do. Yeah.
I think you'll love it because it's so it's so him, but it kind of tells the story of how, you know, people grow up. You know, he was born in 37, and he grew up in this copper mining town in the 40s and 50s when it was a boom town. And
Mm.
so let me read to you just this is so sweet and poignant, and I'm thinking that your father has told you these types of stories as
Yeah.
well. Um, so this one's called Lessons from My Father. Dad never preached, but he taught in stories. He'd sit on the porch after work, a cup of coffee in hand, and talk about the Great Depression. How the grocer on Sullivan Street carried him on credit for months, how he paid every penny back, and how he refused to shop anywhere else afterward, even when Safeway opened and offered discount. Quote, loyalty's worth more than a sale, he told me. A man who helps you when you're down deserves your business when you're up. He believed debt should be temporary, dignity permanent. He didn't drink much, didn't brag, and rarely complained. If something broke, he fixed it. If someone needed a hand, he offered it before they asked. He helped his family throughout his life. I can remember many relatives staying with us until they could get a job and get back on their feet. He often said to remember when you are in need or down and out, and no one else will take you back or help you. Your family will. When I was little, I once complained that my friends had better bats, better gloves. He looked at me and said, son, talent's free. Everything else you earn. Then he handed me a sanded piece of wood and said, we'll make our own bat. And we did. That was Dad. Steady, inventive, unshakable. He didn't talk about love, but you felt it in the way he showed up, in the way he shared his tools, in the way he wiped the dust off his boots before coming inside so Mom wouldn't have to. I think about him every time I lace up my shoes for work, every time I pay a bill on time, every time I see a young man looking for direction. He left me more than stories. He left me a blueprint.
Wow. That is great, man.
Isn't
That
that
is
something like
great.
20 of those types of stories?
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it after listening after 5 years, but it gives you a peek into America back then. And it's like,
Yeah.
you know, it would be nice if we got back to some of those same values.
You know, I think that's the only way society's going to survive, Marshall, is if we do. I mean,
But you know, there's something about, and I'm sure you felt this with your dad. I always felt like my dad had the most common sense out of anyone, and even in my 60s, I was 58 when he passed, but even then, I was still going to him. Like when he was the one guy that I could always go to that had the answer for me. You know,
Hmm.
if I was stuck on something, and I don't get stuck on something a lot, I could go to him and say, "What do you think?" And man, he could get right down to it, um, without judgment, and just, like when I had my when I started my writing career, I said, "Dad, I'm 25 going on 26. If I take this on, I'm going to be close to 30, and I don't know if will I miss out on something?" And he said, "You know what?" He goes, "You're young enough to where if you fail, you can always get a job."
Yeah, yeah,
And that was the one thing that unlocked it for me, that gave me the courage to do it.
yeah, yeah.
It's amazing that they could assess a situation like that very quickly and give you the advice that you needed. I just finished the Lionel Richie book, and he had a
Oh,
father that was very much the same way. So yeah, there's something to those guys who grew up hard bitten, but very level headed, and just you know very very sharp, very very street smart, very very wise. So I'm hoping to capture a lot of that in this book.
well, man, I can't wait to see that book though. That's
Yeah,
I'm going to get that.
that'll be out in April, and so that'll be a fun book. Um, and then a book with a musician, and then possibly another McQueen book. There's a trove of photos from Le Mans that has emerged. So we have to find we know who took them, but this person is passed, and so we've got to find the rights holders to these
Ah,
photos. So those are all things kind of in the works. Well, three of them are pretty much written, but that one I'd really like to do, obviously. But it just all depends if we can find the rights holder or not.
wow. Well, man, we're going to be talking on each and every one of them,
Thank you.
and I do plan on making it out your way sometime next year, and
Okay.
that's definitely on my plan. My one of my two best friends lives out there over on the west side of the valley, and so I plus growing up there and went to high school and all that. There's a lot of people I need to see,
Yeah.
but I plan on coming out there, spending several days, and we'll definitely get together for dinner or something. And talk. We need to make Anthony come out and let him buy us the dinner, like we were talking about in that interview.
That's funny.
we'll we'll make it all happen. Well, Matt, Marshall, as always, a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and I hope it sells a lot of books. This interview, and
Thank you.
it's always great talking with you. You're always in depth in what you do, and quality work all the way around, man. So
Thank you.
I look forward to hearing good things about it, and I look forward to talking with you about these other books coming down the
Yeah.
pike.
Yeah. And you'll be getting that book anytime soon.
Yeah,
Now.
I'm
So
looking forward to it. I'll be
yeah.
showing it off. You know that. So,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
right, buddy. Well, enjoy your evening there in
Thank
Phoenix,
you.
and we'll be talking again soon.
Okay. Take care.
Take care, Mark. Bye bye. This has been another fun filled episode of Boomerocity with your host and producer, Randy Patterson. The theme song is Roll the Dice and is recorded and used by permission from Quentin Hope. Quentin is spelled Quinten, and Hope is Hope. And you can find out more about Quentin at quentinhope.com. Post-production is done by Cardinal Sins Productions. The Boomerocity name, logo, and content is copyright protected. Segments may only be used with written permission by Boomerocity and or its assignees. Inquiry should be directed to input@boomerocity.com. Copyright 2025.